go. We're very pleased to welcome Paul Winstanley, Security EMEA at Lego, James Morris, Head of Security Services EMEA at Aon, Homayun Yaqub, Head of Corporate Security Solutions Practice at Dataminr, Eric Motschiedler at a new organization, Pramod Bhatt, Regional Security Director at AbbVie, Marcus Stephens-Ofner, Group Security Manager, Safety, Security and Resilience at Tesco. It's great to have you all on. Welcome. I hope you enjoyed the event thus far. And we're exploring this concept of the top post holder. It's not a politically correct term. It's just, I don't want to presuppose that we know the name of this leader of security of tomorrow. And we're also talking about tech, and we're talking about the way in which maybe the SOC of the future can help develop this new leader. And previously we've banded about the ideas that the SOC of the future will turn the leader into an octopus, able to simply get lots of threat intel and controls from all sorts of places. Lots of ideas we've thrown up. But Paul, if I start off with you, and then I'll sort of wind my way around. Is it too high level of a question to ask who is the post holder today, this top post holder?
I think it probably is, Pelin, but I think broadly in corporate security teams, I think we need to start coming around to the type of thinking that the top post holder actually doesn't necessarily need to be a conventional or experienced security professional. Rather, I believe the top post holder, I believe organizations are probably looking more towards business leaders than security leaders, and perhaps over the next sort of 3, 5, 8 years, that may actually benefit corporate security teams in the bigger organizations, because my private belief is that business leaders are probably better placed right now in this moment in time to take corporate security teams to the next levels, more integration within the business, more intricate work streams, more work streams around the protections of revenue, which Mike referenced in his last calls, et cetera, et cetera. So we're super strong right now in conventional corporate security work streams. What's going to take us to the next level? I believe having actual proper business leadership is a really good start point to that. And I think in corporate security teams, conventional physical corporate security teams, we need to be a little bit more open to having our leader being from the business, as opposed to 15 or 18 years in security experience.
I like that. And in this event, we're going to deal with the concept of the BSO or the BSO maybe leading the shop. And obviously there's probably a cacophony of people out there saying, no, we don't want that. But that's maybe where we're headed. Homayun, does this resonate with you? This top post holder, of course, we're going to think about how maybe tech and the GSOC will get them to the next level. But the top post holder today, are they a business leader first?
I think they have to be. The idea is, if you think about, the notion of security and what are we trying to protect, I would argue, that perhaps the #1 focus there, whether it's for the traditional CSO or the CISO, is the idea of ensuring and being a key part of ensuring that the organization remains resilient. And so when we talk about resiliency, we're talking about, therefore, putting in the necessary people, process, technologies, or the level of infrastructure, oversight, and governance to ensure that there is no disruption to the business, because that disruption ultimately then has a cost impact. It has an impact to revenue. As we think about that, and we think about what that role has sort of continued to evolve, when you think about here in the US, for example, a lot of corporate organizations place that resiliency function under the security apparatus. And so I do think understanding that vernacular, being able to be comfortable and speaking in terms of how security then translates into protecting the organization, that is both qualitative and quantitative, I think is essential to how we view, both not in the experience set that Paul mentioned, but also comfort in being able to talk in those terms as well, and being able to convey messages because they operationally understand those terms.
I like that, and that concept of the translator or the communicator. I think that's a common thread throughout today. But let's run with that. Pramod, what if we ask the question about the leader? I mean, thus far we've said how can maybe tech affect the leader, but But what about the leader as separate from tech? Because I mean, that could mean the leader is an administrative assistant. I don't know. But what do you think? Separating the leader from tech. Sorry, you're on mute, Pramod.
Am I audible now?
Oh, yes.
Sorry. So I think separating leader from tech is a question, which if I think of right now is the kind of technology is evolving. And if you really want to use technology, you need to have some understanding, of technology. Otherwise, you will have tools. You have now, for example, things like artificial intelligence at your disposal. But if you don't know how to use it, then it's going to be of no use if you don't know about it. You don't need to be a proper technical person, which is not the requirement for a security leader, but understanding technology and how to use it is something is very important. And you asked about earlier about the business part, which I think when you are in military services or any other service, we're always told know your men very well. And same goes for business. When you come in a business, it's very important to know your business well. And this is something very important and which is a requirement. And it often happens when you don't know your business well. You may be a good functional expert, but you will not know how you apply your functional expertise to the businesses. Similarly, you will probably not be able to communicate the language, the jargon which business is using. So you are not accepted part of the community. So you're still, you don't find a place in those monthly meetings, business meetings. So that part is something I think very, very important, as highlighted by Paul and Homayun about this.
That's really key, because if you remain the Department of No, then you might never make certain exceptions for the business. And we'll make parallels with the cyber side and the BISO and all of that, right? Because the BISO will say, shutting this down will cost us more money than the security precaution, right? So we'll have that theme. Eric, Department of No versus Department Enabler. How is this top post holder going to sort of use digitized GSOC technology to their advantage? Will it turn them into an octopus? We mentioned octopus earlier. I don't know if it's an apt thing, but someone with many facets.
To a degree, I think so. Yes, I think we spend a lot of time talking about, when we're talking about the SOC of the future, how people, especially at the top, need to understand cyber and physical security, but often overlooked is the business end. So you really need to speak all three languages in a way. And I think that a lot of the technology will enable leaders of the future to do their job better, because it distributes the risk and it gets real-time information to both sides of the coin. So cyber and physical security teams, it breaks down those silos. I think that's really important. And in terms of resiliency, I think it's good when you have that mindset, because it's not the known knowns or known unknowns. It's the thing that you just don't see coming that really knocks you off your game, I guess. And having that kind of a mindset, having less silos and more communication in there helps organizations to be more resilient. I think that's one of the main advantages.
And Eric, you are a living, breathing, broken down silo, in that you have both sides of the house. What's that sort of journey like, and what can we learn from it?
I think you just have to constantly be humble and assume you don't know anything, and go in and try to constantly learn. That's just the number one thing. And it is very difficult. I mean, I came from more of physical travel security related, even political risk background, and then into an IT company, learning from the beginning. I think I went in thinking I knew more than I actually did, and having to build up that skill set. That's another problem with or obstacle to creating a SOC of the future, is the different cultures. It's almost comical. You can make a sitcom out of it, having your typical ex-special forces soldiers from the physical security end, and then you have the more tech inclined IT guys all in one room. It's just it's something I think that can be a really good advantage, but there's cultural, problems with that. The biggest thing though is you just have to be really humble and every day try to learn something new. And yeah,
love it. And in the audience, I think Abhishek agrees with you. He says, what a security leader needs to understand is how what I am doing either to protect or help the business meets their objectives, which you couldn't do if you weren't humbly looking back and looking at it. Marcus, let me come to you then. Is this now more relevant because the indicators of compromise and the attack surface and the intelligence that one needs to gather as a corporate security specialist is not bound by a network, it's not bound by a building, and this means that all sorts of threat intel that used to be the purview of travel risk management or maybe protest intelligence, it's now for everybody. It's now for the CISO as much as it is for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's all part of the same system. I mean, just to sort of echo back what you're going from, I think single security lead, yeah, I think that's important because when it comes to the C-suite, they don't want to have a different face every time someone's briefing them. They want to have a single point of contact, and they want to have that director that they can establish a relationship with and get on with that. So who sits behind that security lead is, as far as the C-suite concerned, is largely irrelevant. But they need to have a single point of contact. I mean, everyone here knows probably far better than I am, or I do, that there are so many different network feeds and so many information feeds. And I think on one of your previous forums, someone called it the infodemic, and that's absolutely bang on. It's just, there's this white wall of noise out there, and it's down to those analysts, it's down to them to say, right, what is relevant, what isn't? Because otherwise, and you need a team for that. And I feel, if you're a big enough department and you got your own SOC, it needs to remain current, it needs to go on top of trends. And one thing that probably people have been learning, I've certainly been learning, as they say, every day is a school day. It doesn't actually matter what your business does as core business. It doesn't. If you're sizable enough, you're a target from all manner of things, all manner of threats, be it non-state, state actors, whatever threat vector will come. So if you're big enough, you're a natural target. And it's, it goes down to, we talk about travel security, it goes down to people saying, oh, I don't look important. I'm, in this foreign country, why would they target me? Because you're an out of area face. By default, you become a target. You become a person of interest because you're out of the ordinary in that environment. People look at you, and if they sense an opportunity, then you might have a problem. So yeah, it's sifting through that information. I think that's where the SOC really comes into it, is sifting through the white noise, what's relevant, what's going to add value, how can we get ahead of an emerging trend and an emerging threat that will target us.
I like that. So there's a degree of sifting, a degree of proactivity almost. Let's run with that. James, welcome. In the pre-call, we were talking about the evolution of the GSOC, and I think you mentioned the digitization of the GSOC, because I mean, maybe gone are the days where it's just loads and loads of screens, you're staring at screens. It's much more technical like that. What does digitization for the GSOC look like for you, James?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's going to look different to every company, right? And I think I said this on the pre-call the other day, but I think one of the problems sometimes is that we try to find a one-size-fits-all solution. So, something works in company X, we assume it's going to work in the next company. And I don't think it always works like that. And I think, when we're talking about our security structure, about our makeup, about what our top host holder looks like, I think we have to be prepared to be agile enough to accept that different companies have different requirements. And even terms like risk management means different things to different people. I work for a financial institution, that means something totally different to what risk management means to others. So I think there's lots of challenges. I mean, from our perspective, we have a physical SOC, which is about 4 people, and we have a cyber SOC, which is about 450 people. And I think sometimes we've ended up in a position where there was an idea to try and combine the 2 SOCs at one point, and essentially what ended up happening was the physical SOC team almost ended up as a clearinghouse for the cyber SOC team, and it meant that we weren't really even thinking about our physical risks. And I think there are similarities, and I think we have to be in a position where we're communicating and we're sharing information. And I think ultimately whoever the top post holder is in most major organizations, there will be more synergy now between cyber and physical than ever before. But I also think that there are differences, and I think accepting that digitization is hugely valuable, but it has to be done in the right way for the right organization. I think sometimes we see some really great tools, and I think COVID really showed this in a lot of respects. Like there was that, okay, I've got a great tool now let me fit it into my organization, or this company has produced this great product, let's see how I can make it fit into my organization. I think sometimes we see a great product and then we try to make it work for us, and I don't think that's the right approach. It has to be driven by, what are my needs? What are my organizational needs? What is the direction from the top of the organization? How do I achieve that mission? I mean, a lot of military security professionals sometimes talk about commander's intent, but like, what are we trying to achieve? What is the business trying to do, and how do I support that? So, look, I think there's a lot of great tools, but if it doesn't fit for you, then ultimately it's not a great tool. It's just a thing you're spending a lot of money on. So, I think at the end of the day, we still have to have a clear understanding of what we're trying to achieve, and then build the teams and the appropriate technology around that. Because otherwise, you've just spent a lot of money and you haven't actually made your life easier. And having your senior leader go back to the business and say, that thing we just spent 1.2 million pounds on last year, well, actually, it's just sitting in a box, or it is just a box and we're not really doing anything with it. That doesn't help anyone. We just end up looking stupid. So I think we have more options than we've ever had before, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all the options fit for what we're trying to achieve.
I like it. And then if we run with that, Paul, nobody wants to go back to the board and say, yeah, it's just sitting there doing nothing, which is kind of one of the promise of digitized SOC, though, isn't it? Because it will always update itself and it will always become bespoke. But I mean, what's your experience of that?
So I think, as James brings out some really brilliant points, I think if you're going to have a SOC, and if we consider that the SOC, if we think of it in the most simplest terms possible, the SOC is the eyes and ears of the business, and it aims to answer some fundamental questions. One of those is what is happening right now in the world or in this territory impacting on my business? And if so, what is the initial assessment? I mean, that is a cornerstone of SOC. But to make that a success, I think the SOC needs to be risk-based in terms of how it's set up. It needs to be streamlined and it needs to be relevant. So, and if you have all those things in place, you have a coherent plan in place, then realistically, you're never going to have a SOC that is outdated. It is always going to be relevant. And to some degree, Pelham, as you say, self-regulating, self-innovative, all these things, so long as the core fundamentals are in place. And I think the chief post holder is actually key in setting the tone to getting to that space. I don't see the chief post holder as being someone with hands on that work stream necessarily. That's not the way we're set up in the Lego group. I can share that with you, but I think the chief post holder is someone who needs to have a good enough understanding of the risk landscape to the business, and a good enough knowledge of the tech to be able to set the tone to make sure that the SOC is hitting those outputs.
I like it, because that's the thing. It's hitting the outputs. It's hitting those indicators of compromise. So, Homayun, how difficult is it then for corporate security leaders to ensure that a given solution in the GSOC is bespoke? Is that actually difficult, or is there a lot of tweaking to be done within the GSOC or on their side to make it fit them?
It's an interesting question. I think, to James's point, and then, dovetailing off of what Paul just said as well, when organizations have their own unique requirements, and when you start with this idea that you take a risk-based approach, and that's, while that seems very common sense, the reality is too that in many organizations, we acknowledge the need that there is sort of risk is an absolute, maybe not often to the level of fidelity that we need, that then helps tailor how we operationalize a set of solutions. And not all solutions make sense. Ironic coming from someone who sits right now at a solutions company, right, selling capability into that end. But the reality is not all technologies make sense based on the risk environment. Is it overkill? Is it egregious? Is it too extensive? I always took the approach when sitting in the chair, as some of my colleagues here, sitting in that role of a CSO, my marching orders were always around, can I make whatever I'm doing better, faster, or cheaper? And when I think about those components, let's start with better. And I put cheaper sort of at the end of it because it isn't really fundamentally about cost. Better is defined, can I fundamentally establish a technology stack that actually improves protection to the organization? And by that, I mean, am I actually reducing the opportunity space where risk exposure exists? Risk exposure defined by what the business deems as being relevant to the organization as a threat to their activities, whatever those activities may be it financial services, be it production, be it whatever sort of vertical that they sit in. What investments am I going to make? How do I need to tailor those technologies? And I will say too that those investments in technology should be ones that offer that flexibility as well, right? The flexibility to be able to become a bit more bespoke relative to that risk environment. Otherwise, is it going to just literally sit in a box and not actually be leveraged? So that risk-based approach, I'll foot stomp that again because I think it's essential to not only the organizational structure, but everything that goes with it too. What process, what governance are we putting in place, as well as then what technology investments that we're making.
I like it, but Homayun, how can we make the GSOC more proactive? Is it? I guess it's going to be a struggle, isn't it, between ML type answers and the end customer doing more things, more work, more tweaking. You want to know about floods, but you didn't ask about sluice gates, and so you got flooded. How can we make the GSOC more proactive?
Yeah, well, if look, at the end of the day, the world is noisy, right? Quite noisy. You could take the adage that I could continue to add the number of analysts that I need in order to be able to sift through that volume of noise, or I look at various technologies that help with respect to distilling into more meaningful and bite-sized chunks of relevancy. There are any number of solutions that support that end, but to your point about leveraging AI and ML, AI and ML, despite being great buzzwords in the technology space, are really just a way to hard code the human experience to be able to then at scale process large volumes of data into a way that creates that level of efficiency. So when we think about those indicators, you use the term IOCs, indicators of compromise. I'll take it a step further and say indicators of risk. We have all, I suspect as security professionals here, have gone through the classic gumshoe investigative process. And we're going through that process in order to substantiate the allegation or the concern, or maybe it's after the fact. We have that benefit of that hindsight and that retrospective look back in, and we typically rely on finding some incidental breadcrumbs. It would have been nice to have known this much earlier in the process rather than simply reacting to and waiting for the need to formalize an investigation because certain things have already occurred. So when we think about artificial intelligence, when we think about machine learning, when we think about these capabilities, how do we then capture those indicators at that earliest point of detection to raise the flag? Because there are well-established models, to use the classic cyber kill chain example, right? There is a methodology. There are branches and streams and perhaps some deviation, but ultimately there is a kill chain of activity that does occur. And so how do we leverage technology to be able to raise that flag at that earliest point, rather than simply waiting for a known to occur and then having to recover from it? And I think that's the key of becoming a bit more proactive. And so sort of technology should be able to then help leverage identifying those indicators of risk before you're simply waiting for an event to occur.
I like it. So that proactivity, that's great. And I guess then that leads us to the question of who or what sits at the front end of discovery of said risk. So Pramod, I'd be interested in your thoughts. Do you envisage now turning all of your staff into people that input into the front end of discovery? Do you envisage needing lots and lots of third parties? Obviously, you don't want to go to extremes where we're forever finding out about things that are not in your geographic area. But then also that there's similarities with the cyber world and the cyber SOC analysts. I wonder what you think, Pramod.
So I think, just a quick historical thing here, because we are talking about technology here. There have been fintech revolution, there have been edutech revolution, and there have been like health tech revolution. What we will see now, and I think there are early signs which I can see, is security tech. It's coming, and when it comes, sometime it goes exponential. So you might see, growing in an exponential way, where you see more adoption of AI and ML. And when we have greater adoption and newer technology coming, probably we may not need a big army to manage GSOC. So we'll probably see less and less number of people in GSOC feeding those inputs, because they mostly will be AI driven. AI captures data, there's a data science, and then this is how I can visualize in future. But I also see, little bit on the side, because one scope is obviously security, but what I'm also seeing is it might evolve as general operation centers in some places. I can give you a quick example here. I was speaking to last week to a company which is into video analytics, and they told me that they did install their application in Dubai airport for video analytics, and they found another application of the same video analytics which was meant to identify thefts and other things, where they could fine tune it for creating operational efficiency. So there's a aircraft comes to Aerobridge, and there are a certain number of movements happen, goods goes up and down, people go left, right, and they created an efficiency by analyzing with the help of AI, and they could now have 2 more slots, means 2 more aircraft can come in within the same duration. So when AI comes in, we will probably see, our GSOC role maybe expanding more, because there are variety of applications which can be handled. Yesterday, I think when we discussed, we were talking about what about the brand monitoring, brand risk, anti-counterfeiting. There are a lot of things which will come into. Maybe that when we have multiple things being handled by GSOC, you might see a right balance. So we will not lose so many people in GSOC, but yes, slowly we will see more things are being with the help of AI.
And indeed, when that event horizon, I mean, maybe it's not an event horizon, maybe it's just a gradual process, but when we see more adoption, we're going to see more interesting places where executives and principals are in an unusual location. I mean, I'm not jumping on the metaverse bandwagon just yet, but Eric, what do you see then as the future impact of the digital GSOC on the top post holder? Because I guess the promise is it turns them much more omnipotent, much more all-seeing, all-knowing, much more intuitive, like Amazon before on that sort of meme adage. Where does this take us, Eric?
Well, of course, I think AI and the new technologies will make GSOCs and the top post holder more omnipotent, more powerful. But I do think, especially where we're talking about physical risk, and say risk in that scenario where the executive or whomever is going to a semi-unknown or dangerous place, sometimes the old ways are the best, and we should never lose that. So rather than leaving it up to AI, I would always trust an actual person, a source on the ground that's trusted, that you can tell. I'm a big fan of adopting all of these new technologies, but I think you should never really lose sight of those very basic principles like that, the person on the ground. If we're talking about travel security or some event security, that's your best resource.
I like that.
I mean, and I can't predict, of course, what will come with AI. I'm sure it will evolve exponentially, but I think that will always be there.
Exactly. So that person, that person on the ground, that best resource for your organization, does that mean, Marcus, that instead of I don't know, our good friend, the corporate security translator, keeps on talking about the transition from the revolving door from police into private security or military into private security, will we see a sort of a big demand for intel analysts, maybe nation state intel analysts who have fancy a job in the private sector? Is that the most valuable GSOC? Is that in fact what the GSOC of the future is? It's not a technology, but it's a group of people.
Yeah, I mean, Eric's speaking my language. I'm probably quite infamous as a bit of a ground truth guy. That's about as subtle as a house brick to the face. So I know I'm surrounded by information security professionals here, so I shall tread lightly. Look, IT and information, all it does, it shines a torch into an area that you may or may not be aware of an emerging threat. It's then down to a human being to analyze that and go, right, is this relevant? Is it going to impact on the reputation of the brand or on any sort of personal or physical security? Local assets will always far outweigh, and throughout my career, I've had this, someone that sat in DC, someone that sat in London, and you're sat somewhere in the middle of the Middle East, right in the middle of it, and they're saying this and that is happening. And you're like, well, come down here because that ain't happening. Here's a good example. I have to choose this because I kind of haven't been on a plane for a couple of years, so I can't really say. So Hong Kong riots 2019. So anyone that went on Twitter, anyone that went on the media, Hong Kong was on fire. The PLA were across the border, and it was just this mass hysteria about the whole place was about to sink into the sea. Now, I've spent some time on the ground at the riots, in and amongst it a couple of times in 2019, and the ground truth is completely different. I could have been in the middle, and I was in the middle of complete chaos. If I'd have gone a street that side, there's people sat down having dinner. It's just, there is that ground truth, and it is having that independent, verifiable witness, because that only tells you so much. Yeah, it's actually having someone, trusted assets on the ground that are able to feedback and able to give you actionable intelligence and give an informed choice. Yeah, the machine can only say so much. You need that human interaction, someone that has the experience, or can call someone that has experience. No man or no woman's an island. No one knows everything. You're going about the octopus. It's phone a friend time. It's right, okay, I don't know, but I know someone that does know. And that's how it works. It's that network of people. And it goes down to having people that are embedded in the cultures. I've spent a long time in the Middle East. I have some knowledge, but the people that I worked with and the people that I lived with, they will forget more than I'll ever know. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's about what they know, and that's what's actually happening on the ground. And it's really easy, and without going into the whole fake news thing, I don't want to go into that, is bad news sells, and a hysterical headline can have people flapping around and running around like headless chickens in Washington or in London saying, oh, this and the other, the place is about to disappear into the sea. Well, what's actually really going on the ground? Let's find out. And that's where that comes in. That's my 2 cents anyway.
No, I love it. And even I've been taken in by it. You see a photo and you think that is the end of the world. And then you see a zoomed out photo and, it's not quite the way. But James, does this not then confirm more than ever that this digital GSOC and the world of corporate security is squarely in the world of our IT security friends? I think people use the adage, or not the adage, but the sort of the example, you can have all the firewalls you want, but somebody, well, let's not be dramatic, but a bad actor rocks up on your doorstep and suddenly they have the keys to the kingdom. Does this show that the GSOC is a lot more relevant to IT than perhaps they've thus far given it credit?
I guess yes and no. I guess, I think Marcus's point about ground truth, about information, I think it's a good one. From a physical perspective, right? I think you do have to have a good balance between the tools and people. I think my fear oftentimes when it comes to trying to make a physical GSOC too digital is that you do lose that human knowledge and that human experience, which I think is hugely valuable. And I think I think as you see more companies try to reduce the number of people in a physical security GSOC, you're going to end up with this like drop in numbers, and then you're going to see this increase in numbers again because people have suddenly realized like we've bought a tool to replace people, and actually it doesn't do what we want it to do. So we're going to need to get some more people back in running the tool. So I think from a physical perspective, that's probably the case. You know, I think that trying to have a single GSOC that covers physical and cyber just doesn't work. It certainly doesn't in my experience, in my limited experience, I will admit, and I'm sure there are case studies where it has worked pretty well. It hasn't worked in the environment that I've been in. So I think probably digitization is likely more relevant from a cyber perspective, from an IT perspective. I think the physical element can complement that. And this is where I do think you end up with this top post holder, whoever he or she is, ultimately can cover both, because I do think you have that real crossover between, you know, between the physical and the cyber. And I don't see a sustainable future for physical security GSOCs being heavily reliant on cyber. On digitalization, I just don't see it. So, you know, yes and no. I think you have to have that balance. And I think when you talk about a makeup of a GSOC, what does it look like? You know, it is, in my opinion, the very definition of diversity. You know, you can have a ton of really intelligent people. You can have a ton of really intelligent people, but you know what they say about common sense is it's not very common. You can have very smart people, but you have to have that common sense as well. You have to have that experience. You talk about the example of the flooding and the sluice gates. Well, flooding might be the intelligent answer. The sluice gates is the common sense answer, right? You get things from people who have a bit more experience, knowledge, variety of experiences. So look, I think if you're in a major organization, you're ultimately going to see a balance of both. You've got that digitization, you've got that human knowledge, and those, like the best security programs are going to be the ones that find the right balance between those two elements.
I like that, and that right balance, and perhaps depends on the organization. Depends on
100%. But that has to be the key point, right? It is going to depend on the organization. It cannot be a one-size-fits-all solution. It just can't.
Absolutely. Well, I'm conscious of time, but let's go to Paul. Paul, what do you think this then tells us about asking the question: is the GSOC going to transform the corporate security leader into this security leader, like risk manager, risk leader, in a way that maybe we hadn't anticipated before?
So I think it tells us that the GSOC is without question a fundamental and important tool to the success of the holistic security program. And by default, that does and that will elevate the chief post holder. Like I said, I think the chief post holder sets the tone. I know you want to hang on to this image, Pelham, of your octopus and your information on tentacles all over the place. Yeah, I fundamentally I do kind of agree with that, but the GSOC has to be right. If the GSOC is set up right, and that, as you've seen, an amazingly broad variation of viewpoints here from this panel has provoked so much thought. If it's set up right, in line with the business and in line with risk, then yes, it can elevate the chief post holder. It can, but I don't think that is the point here. I think the point is actually probably in reverse. I think the point is the chief post holder needs to be the one who needs to be well in tune with what a GSOC does for the business. Firstly, if that's in place, then yes, it is an important tool, and it is a tool and a vehicle that will absolutely drive the chief post holder up in many ways, up the ladder, up in the eyes of the board, up in effectiveness, in managing risk, in efficiency, in return of value, all these things. So yeah, I guess that's my view.
And that fits nicely into some of the other InfoSec debates we've been having today. Is there any point going up to a CSO and saying, would you like to buy a widget? Well, no, because the CSO needs to hear it from the corporate security manager, the InfoSec manager. They need to hear the business case rather than, this is going to make you look so good. It's, as you say, it's reverse. It needs to make the company look good, which I really like. conscious of time, but Homayun, what do you think then we can hope to achieve today with an event such as this?
That's a that's an interesting question. I think, you know, an interesting evolution of some of the commentary that came up from my colleagues here. But I think, you know, what we've acknowledged is this idea that the chief security officer is in fact a risk manager, validating that rather than just assuming that that is part of their role. That explicitly means when you define that role in normal enterprise risk management terms, that role now becomes essential to protecting the overall organization. When we think about tools like a GSOC, how then do we best enable a GSOC? If the GSOC is a purveyor of knowledge and therefore also a first responder, then where do we help enable them by ensuring that the right level of signal is coming in? I saw Paul's note in response to Marcus. I think, you know, look, as a former human intelligence officer, I can certainly appreciate the value of human-to-human interaction, the value of human assets and people on the ground. I also acknowledge, to Paul's point, that we now have signal coming from every single tweet, every single post, every single chat that comes out that creates now another proliferated source of signal. So all of these components, to be able to do them at scale, require some acknowledgement to, and putting a nod to that technology investment, the right technology investments, those that have the ability to leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning. But ultimately, with respect to this idea that if we go back to that risk function, there are threats, there are vulnerabilities, and there are assets that we're trying to protect. When we begin with that calculus, it then sets the tone for the investments that we need to make across that spectrum of people, process, and technology. So,
lovely. I think that's a great place to end on. And you know, I'm very grateful to all for joining this panel, because with this Ensemble event, we are trying to ask new questions beyond what does modernization mean, right? We are trying to say, well, all right, how are we going to get there? So I really have enjoyed this. Please join me in giving a big virtual round of applause to our fantastic panelists, James, Homayun, Marcus, Paul, Pramod, and Eric. I look forward to seeing you in the audience. And yes, absolutely, Paul, I will not let go of the octopus image. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thanks, guys.
It's been great panel. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks. And I look forward to seeing you in the audience or on Discord. In fact, please do also have a look on Discord. We have some great profiles shared and also nice white papers and lots of interesting documents.